treatments for autism are not like treatments for schizophrenia. It's not more of a chemical signaling issue that causes some of these differences we find. It tends to be more of a brain wiring issue, the places where cells have ended up and which cells are communicating with, and that is not something that is within our power to change at this point. Organizations like Autism Speaks have been at the forefront of promoting therapies for autism that have been very effective, according to some research, at training things like occupational skills and training self-care skills, training people to be able to feed themselves, to be able to communicate better, to tie shoes, to do things like ride bicycles, all types of things that might have been difficult for them before or impossible without very intensive training. Some applied behavior analysis, or ABA behavioral treatments, seek to reduce some of those atypical behaviors like stimming or special interests. Now, not all of them do. Part of the issue of studying whether and how much ABA is effective is that it's a very large umbrella term. Okay, and we're about to talk about that on the next slide with Rethinking Treatments. People who are autistic, many of them push back against some of the things that organizations like Autism Speaks says. And some of these autistic people are now autism researchers themselves. Part of the reasons why they push back against ABA therapies that are so popular is because it is a large umbrella term. So some therapies could be very harsh and still be under this ABA umbrella, and some could be very helpful and also under this umbrella. So because everything's labeled so broadly, it makes it hard to study anything or for parents to choose where they might want to take their children for treatments. The therapies are designed by neurotypical people, meaning people who are not autistic. The original goals of the first ABA therapies were to make autistic people indistinguishable from their peers. Now remember, I told you these are brain differences that don't change, and they're perceptual differences that don't change. So what autistic people argue is that these therapies teach them how to fake normal, and that is the goal of the therapies. Many of the outcomes in the studies that show ABA therapies being effective focus on parents and caregivers rating how satisfied they are with the person's behavior. So that may not tell you much about how the autistic person actually feels inside. And autistic people say that they engage in a lot of masking, and that masking, or supposedly faking normal, puts them under a lot of stress. Okay, they need to be able to do their stimming and self-soothing behaviors even if they look weird. They need to be able to replay their favorite video games over and over to just manage the stress of the world feeling too intense, from sounds being too loud and textures being uncomfortable, in order to cope. And so masking tends to take away or suppress those coping methods. And there's actually one study that shows people who have been through ABA therapies as children are more likely to have PTSD as adults, potentially because of some of these harsh therapies, or potentially because of this prolonged stress of having to fake normal because of these intensive therapies, where they often spend 40 hours a week touching a child, kind of constantly showing them exactly how to put their hands on things, drilling them over and over and over, like intense dog training. Now, again, it depends on where it is and who's doing the therapy. You can find ABA videos that look like incredibly different therapies because of, again, this umbrella problem. So autistic people who increasingly now, because we include them more in society, tend to be therapists and researchers and all other kinds of professionals now, are starting to recommend that therapies need to focus on skills. So all those good things I said about ABA earlier, those are the skills we want to focus on. Focus on helping a person learn how to communicate their needs. Focus on helping them do things like feed themselves. Focus on giving them job training or whatever it is that is supporting their needs at the time. If behaviors are troublesome, like sometimes stimming behaviors can turn into self-harm. Okay, instead of just trying to make them stop the behavior, autistic people recommend that therapy stop it in the meantime. Sure, immediately if you see somebody trying to hurt themselves, but figure out the reason for the behavior. They're doing this because they're under some kind of stress. So let's find them another way to manage that stress once we figure out the root cause. Focus more on acceptance and inclusion. So instead of the Autism Speaks puzzle piece symbol, autistic people like to represent themselves using this infinity rainbow symbol to represent neurodiversity, to show that they are just part of the rich tapestry of human experience, that they're not broken, they're not something that needs to be fixed. They just are people who are in our lives, and we need to just treat them as well as we would anybody else and help them meet their needs that can just look kind of unusual to the rest of us. And we have to think this way way because there are not biological treatments, and autistic people, many identify quite a lot with their disorder because it's just a part of how their brain is and who they are, and it's not something that you could take away. And that's it for looking at developmental disorders. Now I'd like to remind you of your collaborative quiz. I think there was some confusion the first couple of times, the first couple of weeks. So remember to post your initial post on the discussion board by Wednesday night and post a reply to somebody else by Sunday night. And this is just because if you post your very first post on Sunday night at 11 p.m. when it's due in an hour, there's no time for anybody to respond to you. There's just that hour, okay? And some people might have already responded and they're done with it. So I want this to be a little bit of a back and forth so that y'all can help each other study. It's what it's designed for. So post on it early and then come back later so that there can be a little bit of call and response there. Prep Guide 2 is due Sunday night at midnight as well, so make sure to take feedback from Prep Guide 1. Remember that to get the full credit, you need to type 4 sentences for each answer, and that it's going to be 2 points docked for each sentence that you're missing. And remember that for item 5, you need to read the article Pereira et al. 2007 that is linked. Now, in PG1, you read just the introduction of an article and try to summarize that. In PG2, I want you to read just the method section of the article that I've linked and put that into your own words. And method sections are challenging, so that's okay. I know that it's tough and I don't expect you to get it perfectly right. I've tried to provide a little more pointers on the instructions on this one than I did on the previous one, but make sure if I gave you any feedback of what to continue, great job on Prep Guide 1, or what you could do better next time, make sure you take that and incorporate it into your Prep Guide 2 answers. And that's all I've got for this week. I hope y'all have a good week.